We now come to the urgent question. Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for the Home Office if he will make a statement on the publication of 13 reports by the former Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration on the 29th of February and how the Inspectorate will now operate in the absence of a Chief Inspector or Deputy.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We recognise that independent scrutiny, such as that provided by the independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, plays an important role in ensuring we have an effective immigration system. In January, the Home Secretary made a promise to the former Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration to publish all overdue reports as soon as possible, a point that I repeated in the House last month in response to an earlier urgent question. Last Thursday, we delivered on that promise by publishing all 13 reports that were outside of the 8-week commitment to review and respond. We take ICIBI reports seriously, and we do not wait until publication to act on their findings. Indeed, some of the report's recommendations have now been implemented, and work is ongoing across the department to implement others. This includes action to strengthen border security and improve the system for processing asylum claims. The final 2 reports from the former Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration will be published in the established 8-week period. There's no requirement for a Chief Inspector to be in place for that to happen. But the process of appointing his replacement is already underway, with the advert going live the day after the former Chief Inspector had his appointment terminated. An appointment will be made following robust competition in accordance with the Governance Code on Public Appointments. In addition, we are looking at options to appoint an interim Chief Inspector. We will, of course, update the House on the outcome of appointment processes, and we will also continue working with the Right Honourable Ladies Committee in relation to these matters. Mr Speaker, the security and effectiveness of the UK border is of paramount importance. This government recognises that, which is why we've taken wide-ranging action to tackle illegal migration and reform our asylum system. Our efforts are paying off, but there's more to do. We will never compromise on this. We will always put the safety and the interests of the British people first.
Dame Diana Johnson.
I agree with the Minister that the role of the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration provides indispensable scrutiny of vital Home Office functions. And on Tuesday the 20th of February, the Home Secretary sacked David Neil. 8 days later, the Home Office published 13 of the 15 reports the Chief Inspector had submitted during his tenure, none of which were published within the agreed deadline of 8 weeks following receipt. And the reports do raise multiple serious concerns about the Home Office's handling of border security and immigration operations. So can the Minister confirm what action is actually being taken to address the report findings that the protection of borders at airports is neither effective nor efficient, with border posts being left unstaffed? What steps will the Minister take to remedy the serious failures identified in attempts to discover illegal goods at airports? Does the Minister accept the conclusion that attempting to clear the legacy backlog at all costs has led to perverse outcomes for claimants and staff, with quality assurance sacrificed for increased productivity? And with a new Chief Inspector not expected to be in post for 6 to 9 months, and with no deputy to step up and exercise statutory responsibilities, will the Minister explain exactly how the Inspectorate will operate during that period? Is all inspection work now on hold? And what happens to the Inspectorate's 30+ members of staff? Last week, David Neil told the Select Committee of his concerns regarding Wethersfield Asylum Accommodation Centre, relating to suicide, violence and the lack of expertise to manage the situation. Will the Minister now agree for the committee's request to visit Wethersfield? The committee also published last week the 10 changes that David Neil thinks need to be made to improve the effectiveness of the Inspectorate, including the power to publish its own reports, creating a deputy position and access to commercial contracts entered into by the Home Office. Does the Minister have any plans at all to implement any of those recommendations? And finally, can the Minister comment on the joint letter sent by 7 national Home Office editors complaining about the decision to publish a slew of Home Office reports on the same day as the Sarah Everard report?
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful to the chairman of the Select Committee for not only asking those various questions, but also for the opportunity to respond on these points today. I have to say it is rather surprising that ministers are being criticised for doing precisely what it is that they said they would do. We said, and actually I was pressed on this a couple of times, and I was asked when these reports would be laid. I said that that would happen soon. I then subsequently said that that would happen very soon, and that commitment was fulfilled. And what I will say to her, I will give her this undertaking, because this is important, and I care about this, and I know that she cares about this as well, that when it comes to those two outstanding reports, those will be responded to in full and in the proper way within that 8-week window. I would refer back to my late friend James Brockenshire's commitment that he made to this House. She will appreciate that I have come back to the department in December. I would argue we have made progress in laying these reports, and I just want to assure the House that those existing reports that are not yet responded to will be dealt with within that 8-week window, and we will return to that approach in dealing with these matters, which I think is the right thing to do. In terms of the recommendations in various reports, what I can say is that we've obviously responded to those reports. A number of the recommendations have, of course, been accepted. A number of recommendations have been progressed. A number of recommendations have been completed. Those reports speak for themselves and give an indication of the direction of travel that we intend to make. And, of course, we also want to engage with the next inspector around that performance to make sure that they have an important role in overseeing the delivery against those commitments that we have made to respond to the issues that were raised, understandably, within those reports. On the specific issue of general aviation, that falls within the reports that are still to be responded to. As I've said, that will happen within that 8-week window. That is a commitment that I undertake to fulfil. When it comes to the asylum backlog, it is fair to say that there has been pressure from this House to get on and process asylum claims. I would argue that the teams have done remarkable work in delivering on that commitment to get on and process the legacy backlog, with much learning along the way that we take forward into the future processing. But there is going to be increased sampling in the way that the inspector recommended, as well as improvements to IT. When it comes to the arrangements for the IBI functions in this period, that is a matter that is currently under consideration. Minister Tomlinson is actually the lead on that aspect of the department's work, and I know that ministers will update the House accordingly. On the request about Wethersfield, I'm very happy to consider that request from the Home Affairs Select Committee to visit. But I think one of the most frustrating things about all of this is that if Mr Neil hadn't gone to the media in the way that he did, providing that information into the public domain in a way that was in breach of the terms of the agreement that he had with the department to take on this capacity, he would still be in post and able to engage in this dialogue this week.
Tim Loughton.
Mr Speaker, can I follow on some specific questions that the Minister did not pick up from the Chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee? Is it the case, or is it not the case, that David Neil was dismissed by Teams call by a civil servant, and why wasn't he afforded the courtesy of actually seeing a minister? Is it not also the case that despite having a recruitment process that started last November, no suitable candidates came forward and the post has had to be re-advertised at a higher salary? And thirdly, he's not mentioned anything about how the Inspectorate actually operates. Is it not the case that the 30 civil servants are not able to carry on the work on the current reports they're working on? They're not able to carry out any inspections. They're not able to pick up the schedule of reports that have already been programmed in, and they're not able to comment on any responses from these reports. And finally, can he assure me there were no redactions or nothing was removed from those 13 reports published en masse last week, because there's no inspector or deputy inspector to challenge the contents of his actual reports that have been put in the public domain?
Minister.
On the final point that my honourable friend raises, I will just want to go away and check on that point and write to him accordingly. What I would say is that quite clearly this is an important function. The recruitment process was restarted the day after Mr Neal left the role, we are keen to make progress in appointing a new Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration. I would encourage people to put themselves forward. As I say, this is an important role and one that we place value on as a government. I think that the relationship with the ICIBI will be in the terms that I've set out, in terms of getting on and publishing those reports within that 8-week framework in terms of the existing workload. And we also want to continue to engage constructively with them in relation to the role when their successor is appointed. I know that senior officials, the second permanent secretary, is engaging with the administrative team at the ICIBI, and as I've said, we're looking at what can be done in the interim to bridge the gap between Mr Neal leaving and the new inspector taking post.
Shadow Home Secretary Rebecca Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We think of the family and friends of the 7-year-old who lost her life in the Channel this weekend. It matters more than ever to stop the criminal gangs and dangerous crossings that are undermining border security and putting so many lives at risk. Mr Speaker, 13 Inspectorate reports, 1 NAO report with damning revelations on Britain's borders that the Tory Home Secretary has shamefully tried to bury or hide. And now he's gone into hiding himself. He should be doing a statement on these reports. They show shocking border security failures. Border and customs posts not staffed. In one airport, they were told customs is shut down for the summer. Equipment either broken, not available or untrusted, lack of anti-smuggling capability, protection of the border is neither effective nor efficient. So tell us, how many times have customs and border posts gone unstaffed this year? Does the Minister even know? How many high-risk private flights weren't checked in person? How long will there be no inspector in post? More findings. Only 2 people removed under the inadmissibility process they claimed would cover tens of thousands. 147 unaccompanied children who went missing, still not found. And on Rwanda, £400 million of taxpayers' money spent even if no one is sent. If 300 people go, it will be £580 million, over £500 million on a scheme that will cover less than 1% of UK asylum arrivals, nearly £2 million per person. I'll say to the Minister, don't give us any garbage about the Tories having a plan. That's not a plan, it's a farce. Why don't they stop wasting that money and instead put it into rebuilding border security and stopping the criminal gangs? That's Labour's plan. And finally, the revelation that the Home Office has gone a shocking £5 billion over budget this year because they failed on the backlog, on returns, on hotels and on Rwanda. 14 years of Tory government wasting taxpayers' money, weakening Britain's security. They've bust the Home Office budget, broken Britain's borders. Instead of hiding and running away, why don't they just get out of the way and let someone else do the job properly instead?
I think that was a contribution to the House full of sound bites, as ever, but absolutely light on policy substance. And, you know, the one thing that we hear time and again from the Right Honourable Lady and her colleagues is a lot of criticism of what the government is doing and absolutely no credible policy alternative in response. And it is incredibly frustrating, and it just won't do, and the British people see straight through it. I share her earlier sentiments in her remarks about the terrible incident that we have seen at the weekend with that young girl losing her life. We've seen yet again in the last few weeks lives lost in the Channel, and that is a source of regret for all of us. That is why this government is absolutely determined to put an end to these crossings of the Channel. We are making progress. That is why the number of crossings last year compared to the year before was down by over a third. Albanian arrivals down by over 90%, but there is more work to do, and we will continue to see through the plan that is delivering on those results. She specifically mentions Rwanda. We have a fundamental point of difference in that we believe, as the government, that the Rwanda policy is an important part of the answer in putting those evil criminal gangs out of business. It is not acceptable to be spending £8 million a day in the asylum system. But actually, it doesn't take many £8 million a day to get to the figures which have been provided to the NAO in a transparent manner, and we will continue to publish through the annual report and accounts. But we think it is the right thing to do to advance that policy, to put those criminal gangs out of action, recognising that it is novel and that it has been challenging, but she will, of course, have the opportunity to vote for the Rwanda legislation when it comes back from the other place, and I would certainly encourage her to be in the division lobby with us and her colleagues as well, because it just won't do to have no credible plan. And when she refers to the point about one of the comments that was made in the report, we don't accept that. The inspection only covered a small part of our border operations at a specific location and over a limited period of time. It is a snapshot, and it's inappropriate to draw unsubstantiated wider conclusions through sweeping statements based on a 3-day inspection. Ultimately, Border Force facilitated 132 million passenger arrivals last year, processing over 96% of passengers with service standards. And significant progress has been made since this report was commissioned to increase the numbers of officers trained in vulnerability and behavioural detection, and this is set to continue. We treat the recommendations that come from the Inspector with the utmost seriousness. We get on and deliver on those recommendations, and we've also, as I've set out for the House today now consistently, got a commitment to respond to those reports within 8 weeks.
James Daly.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And following on from the point that my honourable friend has just made, it was very clear that there is an issue regarding the publication within 8 weeks, and bearing in mind the public purse is funding 30 civil servants together with the Chief Inspector of Immigration, I wonder whether my honourable friend has given consideration to a statutory written basis to the 8-week requirement, or whatever requirement is necessary or proportionate for the publication of such reports to ensure the deficiencies within the system.
Well, in his usual way, my honourable friend comes to this House with constructive suggestions about the way that government goes about its work. That is a suggestion that I'm very happy to put to my right honourable friend, the Minister who leads on these matters within the department. But I just want him to be absolutely assured that there is a commitment to engage with these reports within that 8-week window, which I would argue is both in letter and in spirit with what the late, great James Brockenshire said a few years ago.
SNP spokesperson Alison Poulos.
I would like to thank David Neal for his work. Nobody can doubt that he was an independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, and his reports bear testament to this work. He called out the Home Office for being particularly poor at communication, for their data being inexcusably awful. In relation to Border Force, he highlighted basic stuff that is not being done. He shone a bright light in the shoddy treatment of unaccompanied children in hotels, some of whom are still missing to this day and the Home Office has not yet found. He highlighted the lack of grip and poor leadership that resulted in those children becoming lost. He highlighted also the chaos and the secret policies being operated as part of the Afghan citizen resettlement scheme, utterly unacceptable. Can I ask the Minister, what happens now to the planned inspections that are stuck in limbo? Inspections which include adults at risk, very crucial when you've had people committing suicide at asylum accommodation. Small boats, again, all the more critical when we have the tragic loss of a 7-year-old wee girl just this week. On high-performance visas, on Rwanda, on Georgia and on age assessment, what will happen to this work plan that the Chief Inspector set out? What will happen to the staff that are in place, those expert inspectors that are in place to deliver that? Will he take on David Neal's recommendations for someone who would follow him in his post? And what will happen to this department and to the future reports? When will we get a statement in the House rather than being brought by a UQ next time the reports are published?
Hear, hear.
So I'm very grateful to the shadow SNP spokesman for that variety of questions. And I think I too actually want to place on record my thanks to Mr Neal for the work that he did. Because I think it is perfectly, I mean there's chuntering from the benches opposite, but it is perfectly right and proper to thank him for the work that he did. There are recommendations that government has accepted and taken forward. We treat the outcome of those reports with the seriousness that it warrants. We will continue to work through those recommendations, even in the absence of an ICIBI. We will continue to make progress against the commitments that we have made. Obviously, we want to get on and appoint a replacement for Mr Neil. That process is underway. We want to do that as quickly as is possible, whilst also making sure that we properly engage the Home Affairs Select Committee in that process, and we will do so in the way that the committee would rightly expect. On the issue of UASC hotels, I think it is welcome that we no longer have any UASC hotels under the auspices of the Home Office, but the recommendations that were made within the report still stand, and again we treat seriously. As I said to an earlier Home Affairs Select Committee appearance, I treat with the utmost seriousness tracing missing asylum-seeking children, and we have managed to track down more of those children relative to the time when we met at the Home Affairs Select Committee, with better relationships with the police around that, improved guidance and other steps. On Afghan arrivals, we continue to see Afghans coming across under the ACRS. That is welcome, and we will continue to evolve that scheme and make improvements where we can. We've made commitments around that scheme. That is an issue that is of real importance to me. That is a responsibility that I take incredibly seriously, to fulfil our promises to those people of Afghanistan who worked with the British government and others. And, as I say, I want to make sure that we go about this recruitment process in the proper way, involving the Home Affairs Select Committee. There will be that engagement with the Secretariat at the ICIBI that the Second Permanent Secretary is leading, and we will get on and appoint a successor.
I'd like to pay tribute to David Neil. It's fair to say when we did the pre-appointment scrutiny of him in the Home Affairs Committee, we did have doubts, but he's proved himself to be a diligent and dogged public servant in some of the most difficult circumstances. Notwithstanding the issue of him not being reappointed, the 13 reports that have been published raise significant issues, whether on the borders at City Airport, Afghan resettlement, child asylum seekers. So what assurances can the Minister give that, despite the fact these have only just been published, work has been undertaken on them? And can my honourable friend the Minister also give me his thoughts on the excellent suggestion that this post should be made independent, so the Chief Inspector can publish the reports when they're ready, rather than dropping them into the Home Office memory hole and hoping for the best?
So it's fair to say, and again, my honourable friend is a diligent member of the Home Affairs Select Committee, it is fair to say that where recommendations are made, we engage with that constructively, and quite often progress will be made against those recommendations even in advance of reports being laid. And he can absolutely have assurance from me that we will continue to work through the commitments that we have made in responding to various recommendations that were made in those 13 reports, and the future reports will be laid within that 8-week window, having made that promise to this House. In terms of the procedural element that he raises, I'm very happy to take that point away and raise that with ministerial colleagues with responsibility directly for the ICIBI relationship.
Anne Abbott.
As colleagues have said, the Home Affairs Select Committee found Mr Neil a very diligent and committed public servant. But I'd like to ask the Minister, does he share the Chief Inspector's concern about unaccompanied child migrants? He reported on them playing very unsuitable games, trying to bet which one of them will be the first to go into foster care, their ages being overestimated. So you have children sharing bedrooms with much older adults. Does he propose to follow up on any of the issues with the Chief Inspector raised?
The Right Honourable Lady should know that that is an area that we have been very concerned about. That issue of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children should never ever be the subject of a game. And I think all of us were horrified to hear about that particular instance, which, following those inspections findings, the department launched an immediate investigation into the inappropriate behaviour of the support worker. who was removed from site immediately and didn't return. As I've said, all 7 hotels used to accommodate unaccompanied asylum-seeking children have since closed, but those are recommendations that we have treated seriously as a department, and I think that there is a lot of learning there for the future that we would want to be cognizant of as we take forward our work, but also the wider work that we do with local authorities in this area of safeguarding the most vulnerable children.
Sir Julian.
May I welcome the Minister's earlier assurance about Afghans who fought or otherwise supported our troops against the Taliban. Can he explain, for the benefit of us not au fait with the details of this dispute, for what reason were these reports not published earlier? At what level was the decision not to publish taken? And had they been published sooner, do we think the inspector would be out of a job and thus looking for a replacement?
The issue in relation to the termination of the inspector's appointment is obviously one that we've commented before in this House. He lost the confidence of the Home Secretary, and there was information shared with the media that ought not to have been shared, which was confidential and that was outside of the appropriate publication process. When it comes to earlier decisions under previous ministers, I can't speak to that in terms of the publication of reports, but what I can speak to is the fact that I said very clearly on a number of occasions that we would get on and respond to these reports. That is precisely what we have done, but I'm also reassuring the House today, and I think this is important, and I think that the House is interested in this particular point, that we will respond to these reports within 8 weeks, which arguably lives up in both letter and in spirit to the commitment that James Brockenshire made all those years ago when he was holding this role.
Mr Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. These reports are cumulatively a quite remarkable catalogue of past failings, but can I invite the Minister to look ahead? He's referred already to the Rwanda scheme. Does he agree with me that the incoming independent inspector must be allowed to examine the workings of the Rwanda scheme? And does he also agree that, in fact, the Rwanda scheme should not be implemented unless or until the next inspector has offered a satisfactory bill of health on it?
It will, of course, be for the next inspector to decide on their programme of work. But what I can say is that I disagree with him on his latter point. I would argue that lives are at stake, that every day that people lose their lives in the Channel is one day too many. We are making progress and seeing through the commitments that we made in relation to putting an end to these Channel crossings, but the policy with Rwanda is absolutely front and centre in terms of being the next part of the jigsaw to put those evil criminal gangs out of business, and we shouldn't wait any longer than is absolutely necessary to get on and deliver on that work.
Khalid Mahmood.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Rwanda policy has cost over £500 million, approximate cost of £2 million per individual that they're seeking to transport over to Rwanda. Will the bill be ever implemented, and is it good value for the taxpayer?
So I sort of hear a lot of criticism there, but no constructive suggestion as to what he would do in the absence of the Rwanda policy. As I've said, we engaged properly and thoroughly with the National Audit Office around those figures. We continue to be committed to providing transparency around those figures through the annual report and accounts. I would argue that the Rwanda policy is an important part of our answer to putting an end to these criminal gangs and the terrible criminality that they oversee. And crucially, this is about saving lives, and we will get on and deliver on that policy, and he will have the opportunity within the next few weeks, no doubt, to vote for that bill to help us to operationalise this policy and put those evil criminal gangs out of business.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Borders Inspectorate found that staff working in a Home Office-run hotel made unaccompanied asylum-seeking children play a disgraceful guessing game to identify which would be the next child to be placed in foster care, a practice which is certain to cause more distress to children who are already traumatised. The same report found that agency workers employed to look after children as young as 9 had insufficient background checks and training. What has the Minister done to ensure that he understands the full extent of the risks to children in the asylum system? And what steps is he taking to end such disgraceful practices and guarantee that everyone working with children is properly vetted and trained?
Yeah. She's right to say that everybody working with children ought to be properly vetted. We have taken very seriously the recommendations that were made by Mr Neil in response to that issue. As I was able to say to the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Hackney, this was a terrible situation. There was accountability in relation to the individual who thought that it was appropriate to play that game, which I think to any member of this House and right-minded person is abhorrent. She's right to say that those children are already in very difficult circumstances, having been through an awful loss, and all of those individuals, and I use the word professionals, have a responsibility to them to care for them and to behave in a way that is appropriate and befitting to that role. And whilst there are no longer any unaccompanied asylum-seeking children hotels open under the Home Office's remit, I still think that there is value in those recommendations that should carry through into the work that we do with local authorities.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner, Dame Sarah Thornton, raised concerns about government policy on trafficking and slavery. Her contract wasn't renewed and that crucial post was vacant for 16 months. Now David Neil, as the ICIBI, has raised concerns about immigration. He was sacked and that post will be vacant for months. The Minister has said that independent scrutiny plays an important role, but does he not agree that under this government, not only is independent scrutiny not valued, it's becoming a sackable offence?
I've been very clear with the House about the basis upon which Mr Neil's contract was terminated. I don't think that it was appropriate to share that confidential information in the way that he did, that was outside of the process for publication. But, as I've said repeatedly now, we do want to get on and appoint a successor. There is an important role here, there is an important remit that the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration holds. The House sees value in that, the Government sees value in that. We are looking at what can be done to bridge the situation in the absence of a full-time permanent Chief Inspector, and no doubt we will say more once that work has been concluded.
John Morrow.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Africa, I met with David Neil a number of times. He was incredibly impressive, robust, well-informed, all over the detail and entirely independent. It absolutely beggars belief that the government should have ignored his reports, because publication is essential for scrutiny, ignored his reports for so long, then sack him over Teams and then dump all the reports out at once. So does the Minister believe that the Home Office is so perfect, everything is going so well in the Home Office, that it should be above scrutiny? Or is it more the case that everything is going so badly on Rwanda, on the asylum backlog, on our border security, that there is no hope of improvement until we have a change of government?
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting observation, but one that I'm afraid sits behind it a lack of policy and a lack of alternative in terms of a credible approach to borders and immigration. On the specific point about Mr Neil, what he said in response to those reports being laid last week is that I think it's a real positive that these reports have been published. I think it bodes well that the Home Secretary has gripped his officials in getting these reports published so quickly. I agree with him. I promised that we would lay those reports. We've got on and done it, and we will table the outstanding reports within the 8-week window moving forward.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last week's figures showed 46,000 people still in asylum hotels. David Neil's report said, and I quote, "There is no evidence of a Home Office strategy to end hotel use as recommended by ICIBI in 2022. He's right, isn't he?
Minister.
I'm afraid what is right is that the Honourable Lady consistently votes against the strategy to end the use of hotels, as do her colleagues on the front bench and on the opposition back benches. The fact is that the way in which you address the issue of hotels is to diversify the accommodation offer, for local authority areas to engage properly with dispersed accommodation, and I would encourage all members of this House to take an interest about the performance of their respective local authorities. Getting on top of this through larger sites like the ones that we have brought forward, but also crucially reducing the flow of people coming across the channel, arriving in our country illegally. And every time and again, the opposition benches have the chance to do something about the flow of people arriving that undoubtedly leads to the very pressures that she touches on. They refuse to do so. I think that is where the scandal really lies.
Andrew Gwynn.
So is it the government's failure to tackle the asylum backlog, or is it his inability to grapple with the asylum hotel issue, or is it the staggering £2 million per person cost of the Rwanda deal to take one person out of this country, the reason why he's broken the Home Office budget and he's coming cap in hand next week to Parliament to ask for an extra £5.5 billion of funding for the Home Office?
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, that yet again, this is another opposition member with no credible alternative to speak of, just lots of complaints about the work that the government is doing, and we are making progress. As I've said, the number of people arriving last year via the Channel was down by a third compared to the year before. The population accommodated in hotels is going down. The number of hotels that are open is reducing. This government is making progress. We are living up to the commitments. He can keep parroting figures and chunter him from the back bench. But the fact is, what I'd rather him do is to come forward with a credible alternative plan. Perhaps then we can have a conversation.
Quite right.
Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The shambles, that is the ongoing mismanagement of our borders and the government's mismanagement of the huge asylum backlog, which has been just referred to, is now enhanced by an additional shambles of an unnecessary interregnum. Now, in answer to my right honourable friend's question a moment ago, the Minister seemed to imply that independent oversight would not be necessary in the next few weeks and months whilst there is an interregnum over the Rwanda deal. The implication being that if the government is absolutely right, best case scenario from their perspective, 1% of all asylum seekers will go to Rwanda, but apparently that is so important that independent oversight is not necessary during this period. Will the Minister confirm that until a new inspector is formally and fully appointed in post, there will be no further progress on deporting anybody to Rwanda?
Yeah.
It is rather ironic, isn't it, that the honourable gentleman is arguing for due process on one hand and then saying that we should dispense with due process on the other. The fact is that the reason that the Chief Inspector of Borders contract was terminated was because of the issues that were not in accordance with the agreement around the post. That was not an acceptable situation. The Home Secretary lost confidence in him, and that was why the steps were taken that were taken. But when it comes to oversight, I welcome accountability. There will be opportunities for scrutiny of the work in relation to Rwanda. The point that he seeks to suggest that I had made, I was very clear in saying that we should not waste any time when lives are at risk in the Channel. I think we shouldn't waste a moment in getting on and operationalising that Rwanda policy, but there will, of course, be plenty of opportunity for scrutiny of that work.
Jim Shum.
Mr. Speaker, can I just put in record my thanks to the Minister for all his work that he did for one of my constituents last week and ensuring that one of the Ukrainian babies got back to Northern Ireland, and thank you for that. In relation to this question, bearing in mind the gap that is left in this vital component of our immigration response, and for example, the most recent difficulty in Northern Ireland with the absence of ministers in situ meant that senior civil servants had the ability to make decisions but were loath to do so, and those who did make decisions did not allow for the usual accountability and explanation of decisions. So in relation to the role of civil servants and the importance to have the ministerial oversight of all that, how will the Minister, in relation to the independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, ensure that this is not the case until a replacement is in place? Thank you.
My honourable friend goes about his business in the House always diligently, and he speaks with great passion about Northern Ireland. I am really delighted that we now have ministers back in government. I am looking forward to engaging with counterparts in Northern Ireland around these issues, and I just want him to be absolutely reassured that engagement will be at the cornerstone of the work that we do. There is a commitment to engage thoroughly and extensively, and as I say, we want to get on and appoint a replacement inspector. We think that this is an important role. We think it's an important role for everybody in the United Kingdom. Those functions that they oversee matter to everybody, the length and breadth of this country, and we will make that appointment as soon as we're able.